Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We are broadcasting from KWKY Mercy One, Iowa Catholic Radio Studios. I'm doing that here in Des Moines, where I'm the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Executive Vice President of the Newman Idea. You can check both of those out at mchs.edu and newmanidea.com. newmanidea.org. Bud is out there in Pittsburgh. Bud, what are you up to in the city of Three Rivers?
I'm the Director of the National Institute for Newman Studies here in Pittsburgh, and we're at newmanstudies.org.
So, folks, we're out here in Des Moines, at least. It's starting to be full-on spring. So I know everybody's been more cautious of what their bodies have been doing lately, especially in terms of, coughs and everything like this. And so the flowers are blooming, or in our yard, that means the dandelions are blooming. And so spring really starting to be here. People wanting to stay outside, things like this. It's a way in which we know that, we've been dealing with COVID for weeks now, but time starts moving on and we see nature responding and everything like that. So I do hope people get a chance, at least even if it's just out in their yards, to enjoy the fact that the seasons are changing, especially finally here in Iowa, where only a few weeks ago we were having snow. But what's Pittsburgh like out there?
Yeah, one of my daughters just told me it's 67 outside right now, so we'll take it. I think it's supposed to rain most of the rest of the day, so we're taking a little break from homeschooling. I don't mean to make light of the situation in our country, which still is quite serious, but I do have to say, as someone who struggles with seasonal allergies, it's kind of it's a trial for the mind these days, because any sort of sign of cough or wheezing, you get a bit nervous. But for me, that's kind of par for the course this time of year.
Oh, that's definitely the case for my entire family. And so if I sound like, I've not taken up smoking. I don't want anyone to worry about me in that regard, I guess is what I'm saying. But yeah, life goes on, and you start to remember, what was it like back in 2019 and 2018, the time before, and making comparisons to what things were like. So, life is, you don't want to make anything, like you said, light of anything like that. But I'm hoping that people get a chance, if even in the small ways, to appreciate, like you said, things like spring and in the midst of everything like that. We're still in Eastertide. I hope that people are finding their own ways possible to celebrate that with their families. Again, that seems like something that was both yesterday and a month ago. But hopefully, the ways that we're making sure to reach out and finding people to talk to. And I know that some people are getting a little chances to do a little more than they used to just even a few weeks ago around the country. So hopefully blessings for everybody out there listening and looking to the future.
Yeah, and you mentioned dandelions. I saw a friend post on Facebook recently that dandelions used to be celebrated and embraced. So something to think about this year. Don't just automatically go to eradicating your dandelions from your yard.
Yeah, I really wanted to try to eat them. You're supposed to you can make wine and tea out of them. And then the minute I started to do that, people who with more gardening knowledge than me immediately stopped me and said, there are so many chemicals in the ground. Do not eat your dandelions in your front yard. And I said, note well taken. As always, we're underwritten by Mercy College of Health Sciences, mchs.edu. I know multiple of our students who they're the graduates of Mercy doing the hard frontline work here in the middle of the COVID crisis. We're very proud of them. If you're interested in being a part of the medical response, not only for COVID, but in the future, and helping people in this way in concert with the Sisters of Mercy and all that they have done in their legacy, mchs.edu. Starting in summer if you'd like, but we also have all the fall classes as well.
Yeah, it's finals week, so it's game time. I remember in college, all my buddies were stressed and I was the nerd. can't wait to demonstrate what I learned this semester. But I'm getting some, I'm getting some good, solid research papers at the end of this spring semester. Kind of hard to believe.
No, well, that's good. I mean, hopefully, the crucible of what we're going through, you can either that can affect a lot of people, and no one should feel bad feeling the bumps and bruises of the day. But I do think that it's interesting to see how well some of the students are responding, and we're very proud of them. We've had some Uncommon Good All-Stars here on the last few weeks. We have one that we haven't talked to for a while on today. Steve Wichmer, the Catholic Movie Guy. You should go check out his Catholic Movie Guy podcast. But we're having him on because I'm guessing some of you are watching more movies and television than you had in a long time. And so we thought, what better way to maybe lighten it up a bit, finally after processing a lot of the events of the day. Let's go talk to Steve and have him talk about maybe movies that you in your free time or with your family should get a chance to talk about, and maybe just even the experience of what it's like to think about movies now that we don't go to theaters, and making time to experience things like movies together with a family. So Steve Wichmer back on the show, Catholic Movie Guy. We're always happy to have him with us. And he even got Bud to watch a few movies that I don't think Bud would have otherwise. So, a momentous occasion.
Yeah. Like you're saying, Bo, I think in the normal routine of life, sometimes it's hard to sneak in movies because you get home from work and dinner, get the kids ready for bed. But I mean, understandably, families have a little more time to sit down and talk about these things. So hopefully we can give folks some good fodder movies can be an opportunity to reflect on some important themes with your family. So we're going to try to do that today.
So, yep, Steve Wichmer, the Catholic Movie Guy, coming up after this. This is Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr, the Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the show. Today our guest is Steve Wichmer, the Catholic Movie Guy. Steve has been on the show multiple times. We've been on his show. It's always great to have him on the air. And like we said, we think people have had a bit more time to maybe watch movies as a family. So we wanted to get Steve on to talk about movies that people should watch, and maybe just the phenomenon of how movies can bring families together in times such as these. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hello, guys. Good to be with you, and I'm glad we're all still alive and kicking, so I'm honored as usual.
That's always good. Yeah, we're alive, kicking. If you have your jobs, you should be very thankful for what's going on. So, Steve, have you had to change the way you've been watching movies, i.e., because there's more kids around and more, you have to do more family things, and you're not able to sneak off into the Plato's cave of the movie theater or watch something on your own?
Well, I haven't been out and about watching movies before the coronavirus because of the death of MoviePass. So that financially caused me to refocus my energy, and this has just brought it home. But I've always been a big believer, I instill in the kids the Catholic faith first and foremost. But second to that would certainly be a love of the movies. And so I think it's my duty to watch as many movies as possible. So this has just been a normal April as far as I'm concerned.
That's nice. Well, I know that there's plenty of movies that we can get into. But before we do, like you said, MoviePass makes movie watching a lot more difficult. But for people who maybe haven't got to hear different parts of the show, not only just to advertise your podcast, but what made you decide that the bold claim you were going to make about yourself is the Catholic Movie Guy rather than the Catholic lawyer or the Catholic St. Louis Cardinals fan? Other things we know that you enjoy as well.
So there's always been a sort of niche for Catholic movies and reviews in that regard, and I not that those aren't great, and especially during this Easter season and everything, it's always good to watch religious films. But I'm the Catholic movie guy. I'm just a Catholic guy who likes movies, and I did not find there are some good online reviews, but there was no one with a podcast that filled that idea, which is just a Catholic guy living my life. I want to see how to engage with quality art in our time and discuss it. And So I didn't, I have no theological training other than Catholic school, and I'm a lawyer by trade. But what I have, from a very young age, steeped myself in is watching movies and talking a lot. And so that's how I did it. I dubbed myself that because there was no Catholic movie guy. And until someone takes the crown from me, you can find me at CatholicMovieGuy.com and just hear one Catholic's perspective on quality art.
It's sort of like Highlander, but not as
there can only be
Connery.
one. That's right.
Well, so I'm glad that we're throwing out really old movies instead of, coming out of the gate with a new one. But to rectify that, so what's a movie that you would recommend that they watch? We can talk about more the phenomenon of some movies being directly released to streaming services, or even sort of the way that there's streaming services are taking over even before COVID with, Netflix releasing their own movies. But if there's just one that out of the gate you say people should take a chance to go watch this movie, what would be the first one you'd want to kick off everything with?
Do you want to start with the more adult moviegoer or the family viewer?
Let's do the family viewer first, and then people can appropriately make decisions after that.
Okay, so family-wise, one of the biggest movies that's on streaming right now, and for free if you have free, I say that if you subscribe to Disney Plus, is Onward, the new Pixar movie. Speaking from my personal perspective, though, this is a little fraught with peril because it seems now that every single movie that comes out that maybe period, but that's aimed at a family audience coming after the last Star Wars movie has to have a more or less oblique reference to a same-sex partnership, and this one is no exception. So there is such an oblique reference in this movie, but I'm not going to harp on that because, that's one of those things you can find out on the internet. You can read a review and take it or leave it. If that's going to stop you, I can't argue with you. But if we just put that to the side, I went into this movie very skeptically because the last few Pixar movies, in my opinion, have been, not necessarily bad, but certainly a step down from their heyday. And this one didn't look great to me. It looked like some hard rockin', elvish, trollish figures. I don't know. And they're trying to bring their father back from the dead. It was all very weird. So I came in with very low expectations, but I have to say I watched it the other night, and I was blown away. I don't know if you've seen it, Bo and Bud, but it emotionally affected me, and it has as its main theme, I think, a calling back to a sort of traditional understanding of human existence that it seems to say is lost on the modern world, and so it's a very interesting point in that way as well.
Well, I do think it's interesting. Go ahead. No, Bud, go ahead.
No, as Steve, one thing that jumps out to me about the recent Pixar films, which as a Catholic parent, I'm really pleased to see, is it felt like when we were growing up, especially like in the Disney orbit, a big motif in like animated flicks was sort of like the misunderstood adolescent or young adult who has to kind of like free themselves from the constraints of parenthood, of like authoritarian parent figures. I think I even remember when we went to church together having like a coffee hour discussion with a friend of ours about the merits of Frozen, and you and I kind of shared these complaints about Frozen, but this movie kind of goes in a different direction, right?
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, looking back on Frozen, it's well made. Don't get me wrong, and there are things that work, but it's one of my most hated movies of all time because of the underlying themes. You have this sort of cast out person whose parents literally lock her away and tell her to stifle everything about her, and then she becomes free by breaking those chains. And there's a lot of Disney movies it gets very tiresome. The kid knows more than the father. They have to teach the mom how to live. And no, this movie is the exact opposite. They're trying to literally conjure up their dead father. And in this universe, I would argue morally, it's not like a black magic kind of thing. By discovering their true roots, to bring back their father, and you would think just kind of just to learn from to have a moment with the father, but it's more about that, to discover what it means to become an adult. And you saw a similar theme in Coco, and I couldn't agree more that theme and the emotion that they're able to bring out of those themes has been very successful.
I did think that I did think that this was supposed to be like Frozen for dudes. Like I thought that's what they were. That's what they were going for. It's like, oh well, we've got a lot of the magic of sisters, so we should do brothers. And it really didn't even, because, magic and like one word, Frozen, onward, like it's funny what parts of the dictionary they're using now, whereas like in the past, it was like, put as many adjectives as possible. So they did a horrible job really advertising it, but I actually think Pixar usually, when they do a really bad job advertising a movie, they actually come they surprise you. Like I didn't know what Up was about, for instance, when it was coming out. But I think that you got this exactly right, that for once in a long time you have a movie where not only do you start to see like the impact of like not being able to have a dad around has on everyone, but then how other male figures take on dad roles, and that the part of like what you have to do to grow up is not usurp that sort of the confines of anything, but to sort of be able to see relationships in a much more full way and understand why people were doing what they were doing, and even if they didn't pull it off perfectly, the reason why that foundation being there was so instrumental in your life. And I'm like, yeah, this is a movie about like rock and roll and goblins or something, and it really did. It's the first movie that I thought did that very well in a long time, and even sort of a glorified sacrifice for the sake of others being a high watermark of you being along your way and growing up.
Exactly. And it's interesting that you say that. First, on the one word title thing, that is a pet peeve of mine. I don't know, that's like brave. Yeah, it's okay, that's enough. Okay. But yeah, terrible advertising, very, very, very well done movie. But it's really, like you said, it's more than about the search for the Father in the end. It's more about a brotherhood and a handing down of tradition. And you can watch these movies with the political lens on, and like we already mentioned, but also the fact that the Manticore and the mom have to have their part. But really, this is a movie about brothers, and it's not your typical way that you would see a children's movie playing out. And I thought that part was refreshing.
Steve, there's another prominent Catholic movie reviewer. Am I allowed to mention his name? Is this like your arch rival, or?
No, I'm not. I'm not nearly popular enough to be a rival, but he is. He was. I assume you're talking about Stephen Gradana.
SDG. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, you can mention him. He's a huge influence on me, and he is a very insightful film reviewer. Yeah. Not one that I always agree with, but yes, go ahead.
Well, in his review, he kind of roped like this film together with Coco. And it's interesting because that last one, this one, and then their next release all deal very directly with the theme of death, and especially like children approaching the question. And I've seen Coco. I've read about Onward, and I'm guessing, did you and Bo watch this with your children, or was it like a date night?
No, it was a family viewing.
Family experience. Well, like one thing Gradanas brings up, and I loved Coco. Like I thought it was just this amazing artistic depiction of like Day of the Dead traditions. But in both instances, he kind of had a beef with like the theology there. Like, did your kids raise theological questions in relation to what they've learned in church about dying, or was it just like an opportunity to discuss these themes in like a profound sort of way? Yeah,
I think that this is a very good subject to jump off on, because you can't use a Pixar movie to teach kids the faith, and I think sometimes you do learn more about reality from movies, unfortunately, now than you do in a Catholic school, for instance. But no, I think if you have kids who are well formed in the faith, they might understand. They might have disagreements with the movie, they might have questions about the movie, but it's not going to affect them, particularly in a world where you're dealing with clearly fantastical creatures, like in this one with elves and warlocks and all that kind of thing, versus Coco. But I think the important thing is these movies are not a real answer ultimately to the questions, but they all diagnose the problems. These movies that Pixar's wrestling with the question of death and what is the meaning of death in a world that putatively is all about acquiring things and commerce and satisfying your instant your gratifications in the here and now. And I think, that's why these movies are wrestling with that subject, because the modern world doesn't give you a good answer, but our faith does.
Yeah, I'm I'm reminded of people. Well, okay, so to be the nerd, I'm reminded of Aristotle saying you shouldn't expect exactness out of the subject under consideration beyond the exactness that can be demanded of it. So, for instance, right, there's a difference between a 90-degree angle that someone doing geometry has to prove versus what a carpenter can do in real life, because there's no such thing as perfect 90-degree angles in real life. So he's talking about this in this big philosophical point. I get this way when people are talking about movies and asking fantastical movies of all to sort of, dot every I and cross every T. And it seems that sort of misses the point. I mean, what's fresh in my mind is there's been this huge internet fight, because evidently we all have time now, of whether the existence of orcs, like in Tolkien's universe and then like Dungeons and Dragons and all that stuff, are orcs racist? And this huge debate about, like, should you create fantastical creatures that you say all of them have certain characteristics? Now, I do not want to jump off into that, because it is a fever dream of insanity that has been happening on the internet. But of course, the point being is, well, guys, like, are you going to get mad at like Aesop when he says like ants are industrious and and bees are busy? You're like, I'm sure every single bee is, their own unique flower, and we're papering over their personality, but you're missing the point of the form, right? Which is to say, I'm making a general analogy about how an animal is on a human behavior. Okay, well, I think we pull this off with movies all the time, that if you were going to make Coco or Onward theologically crisp with no problems, you wouldn't have a movie, you would have a theology textbook, which people would not stream into their houses in 2020. And so, I think I understand if like what you were worried about is like sort of flagrant teachings that were like morally opprobrious, as it were. But to try to kick Onward in the shins because a dad's legs show up, but not the upper half of his body, seems to me misguided.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, art is artifice, there's no point to it. And that's why it's entertaining and fun. As good as the Baltimore Catechism is, it's not going to provide you with a lot of leisure time. And art is supposed to entertain, but it's also supposed to, use artifice to convey truth in a way that is more palatable or can be reflected more on in your lived experience. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like complaining that, this pale ale isn't a good stout. It's just totally different. And it's not for everyone. I don't think everyone maybe can get the same thing out of a movie. I'm sure that the personality of the person and their background plays a large part in that, but complaining about things like that and the racism of orcs, you're so far afield, you're missing the point. And it's probably best that you do go back to the Catechism and turn off the TV for a while.
Well, we only got a little bit before we come up on the break, but speaking of people getting something out of a movie, I think Onward, released directly to streaming services because of the COVID-19 crisis. There had, of course, been movies before that one, maybe we could bring up in the second half of the show, like The Irishman, where it didn't have a theatrical release. It went straight to Netflix. But this, and then there's this whole hubbubaloo in the news. The Trolls World Tour, which I've not watched, has made bukus of money. And evidently the people who made it are talking about, I think it's Universal Studios, are talking about releasing things simultaneously online in studios after all this is over. And one theater chain said if they do that, we'll never show one of their movies in theaters again. So this is this whole fight that's sort of getting ready to bubble up. I just wonder, Steve, as the Catholic movie guy, do you think there's something to be said about the difference of experiencing, enjoying movies, that if everything goes to direct streaming, would something be lost with theaters declining?
Yeah, I'm gonna tiptoe out here because I don't want to draw an analogy between say going to mass and live streaming the mass. Live streaming the mass is great, but it's not the same. Obviously, there's no, the sacraments have a real material physical element, so the analogy only goes so far. But there is a great experience. There's a uniqueness to watching a movie with other people in a theater. There's a uniqueness to watching a movie with your family versus yourself. And I think that movies themselves kind of call out to you and can tell you by what they are, whether you really need that theater experience. But speaking personally, there's something very satisfying about going to the movie, having a set-aside place and a set-aside way to watch this film and to see it presented in the best possible way. So I think there always will be a special place, and there should be movie theaters. But generally, and particularly for lower budget films, indie films, less visually arresting films, I don't think that this, having a theater on every other corner thing, that's just not tenable, and it probably shouldn't be. It should probably be a big experience, a unique experience for maybe certain movies. And I certainly haven't, especially with the prices, missed, just paying like $15 for a soda and popcorn. It's just not something I've really begrudged. So I haven't exactly cried, and I've enjoyed watching movies on my couch.
Yeah, I do think that you're right. Like, there's in one way no analogy, but there's because we don't want to like besmirch like with putting those relationship, but definitively there's something bodily about being in a crowd. So it's funny that you can even be in a movie theater with like 3 other people, and like the whole point is you're there alone and it's dark, but it's still like you're a crowd. I mean, I think it would be the same thing, right? Like, Bud, don't you think, with like baseball or football, right? Like, there's a way in which watching TV, a sport at home, is like a better view of the game, but it's still different than being a part of the crowd.
Yeah, I think we're nostalgic about theaters for a reason, and that kind of smell of the artificial butter and taking in certain films and that kind of experience as a group. Like, I think about fans clapping during certain points of Star Wars, but there are some films like, the scene in Jurassic Park where the T-Rex like spins around the Jeep. I'm so glad I was able to see that in the theater. And unless you've got an income like Bo's, you just can't recreate that experience at home.
That's right. You guys should see my my man cave. Well, on that note, before we start throwing out like what everybody makes, we better go to commercial. For Bud, this is Bo, Steve Wichmer here, the Catholic movie guy. We're going to take this break, and then we'll be back right after this. This is The Uncommon Good. Stick around right after these messages. Back to the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Budmar coming to you this Wednesday. We're glad to have you on the show. Thank you for listening and supporting Iowa Catholic Radio. Our guest is one of the most all-stariest of all-stars here on The Uncommon Good. We have Steve Wichmer, the Catholic movie guy, back on the show. Steve, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So I know that we want to try to get through other movies to talk about. We talked about Onward and sort of referred back to a lot of things and made us talk about the idea of watching movies themselves. But let's actually talk about some other flicks that we want to make sure that people, get your magisterial Highlanderish opinion on about whether they should watch or not. One of the obvious ones that I think was making the rounds in people's minds right before COVID and stuff started to really kick in, the Netflix special of Martin Scorsese, The Irishman. As you pointed out in the first part of the show, Steve, whereas Onward is a family flick that we can generally recommend, there's a few things that people should keep in mind and, always recommend it what's best for your family. The Irishman is decidedly not for children and some other adult humans. But that doesn't mean that it's not something worthy of consideration. So, Steve, The Irishman.
So before I get to the particulars, just to satisfy those commenters of mine who stumble upon my podcast and then tell me that the movie is rated R and so they won't be watching it, I totally respect your decision. And there are a lot of great websites that you can find out like the exact minute that such and such curse word or scene occurs. You can check out IMDb's parent guide. You can check out kidsinmind.com. The Catholic News Service, they all do a great job. So be aware of those and before you go into any movie. But if you're going to take the plunge on The Irishman, I think you're going to be rewarded extremely. You're also going to have your whole night full because it's like 3.5 hours or whatever. And I think, we discussed this on my podcast a while back, Bo, but even though it probably you could cut a half an hour and you still have a great movie, why would you, kind of a thing? And especially during the time of Corona, just saddle in and watch a mob movie But it's not just, you think you're going to get Goodfellas Part 3 or Casino Part 2. You're wrong, because I think this is Martin Scorsese and Martin Scorsese's, hashtag mob picture reckoning with its own mortality and its own meaning. And everything in this movie, I think, is framed from a Catholic view of the end of life, the finality of the mortal world passing away, and are you going to be able to make amends or to get right before the end?
Yeah, I have to say off the bat that I wasn't bothered by the length of this film, and sometimes I'm not a fan of really long films. Like I think to myself, like, oh, an hour could have easily been cut, for instance, from Dances with Wolves. But with this film, I think the length of it really serves an important purpose, because the premise of this 83-year-old man thinking back over his long life and trying to make sense of it. So in that sense, I didn't really feel bored much during watching the film. But I'm curious to hear both of your guys' takes about, Flannery O'Connor talked about the Christ haunted South, and I think Scorsese, like, this isn't a very original opinion. He's certainly like a Catholic haunted filmmaker. Like, his experience of the church growing up has certainly impacted how he does films. But really, especially towards the end of his career, where you've got The Departed, and I think disappointment in the church being in the background of that film, and then Silence, of course, about Portuguese missionaries heading to Japan, like, it's front and center. How do you all like take those three films together? So those two, and then The Irishman, in terms of understanding where Scorsese stands with the faith now, or is that, is it hard to plumb?
The only thing I'll throw out before, we turn it over to Steve is, like, Bud doing shots fired at Dances with Wolves might be the most complaints we get on our show ever. So, Bud, that was ill-advised, because the Dances with Wolvites, I think that's their name. No, I'm kidding.
All those Kevin Costner fans out there.
Yeah, the Kevin Costner fans are
fair
turning
game
off.
now. Costner's fair game.
No, Steve, I actually think that, like, when I was on your show, that we talked about this sort of trilogy of Martin Scorsese, at least, plumbing the depths of what does it mean to rectify what he's known for, the sort of ultra violence in his movies, with the sort of Catholic imagery that, of course, really is the foundation of his camera work in many ways.
Yeah, and Bud makes a great point with the Flannery quote, but everyone is, not just Catholics who may have fallen away to some extent, but everyone is Christ haunted, because he's the center of history. And so, you see that more or less in, I think, almost every work of art, but with Scorsese, it's just becoming more and more obvious. I think that actually an interesting movie to go back to outside of those three is Hugo. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but it's ostensibly a children's film, and it's about kind of the magic of film and art, and what why it's important, why it's so meaningful, which harkens back to our beginning of this discussion. But that was kind of one of the first movies. I mean, even back to like Raging Bull, he was wrestling with the faith, obviously. He always has, but that was kind of the first one where he's kind of taking stock of his life, seeing the end of the tunnel, and I think trying to rectify and come to grips with it. And it's only gotten more and more forceful throughout that time.
I do think that that's an interesting. I think that people are drawn to these sort of things when they see people make films that are that they get known for, that are so, let's say, problematic in the view of religion, like The Last Temptation of Christ, for instance, with Martin Scorsese. But then in the end, like, addressing on the nose this idea of, like, am I actually, would I stand behind the choices I've made? And it's one thing to hear someone say that themselves and talk about it, but to show it in a work of art. I think that's why some of these late movies of any sort of artist, just like the sort of late paintings or the late poems of certain of the greats, really, it's not necessarily that maybe they're the best or not, like that's different artist to artist, but this sort of question of being able to take a movie, which in many ways already is sort of by nature nostalgic, right? Like, every time you watch a movie, you watch things that they filmed the year before. But movies make us reminisce and think back. And so here you have people who've made a career out of making us think back and remember and now they're doing it sort of live for us. And if there's anything else that The Irishman does well, it's not only Scorsese, it's someone like Joe Pesci, who to me may be his best role that he's ever done. You can't help but think he's also making a commentary not only on the character in the movie, but on other characters he's played, which, that's why I think it's resonated with so many people. I also think that's why so many people are dogging on the old scenes where Robert De Niro is supposed to be a young man, but he beats people up like an old man would. That would be the CGI in a few places would be the only thing I think that people can rattle a bit. Otherwise, I really do think it's a very powerful and good movie.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think you guys gave the necessary provisos at the beginning of this segment, but if folks can bear through some of that, I don't want to give away the ending, but I think it's a profound reflection at the end there about Catholic sacramentality and God's grace in the midst of course, like sort of like a terrible personal journey in a lot of ways. Steve, I wanted to pivot real quick to The Marriage Story. This is another film that, you have to give the necessary precautions before.
Not so Christ haunted either.
Yeah. But that being said, it did receive a lot of praise. I was far less of a fan of this film than The Irishman. But what do you think? Why do you think it was nominated for an Oscar and has gotten a lot of critical praise?
So I have to be the man on the island on this one, because I think I'm going to be a contrarian based on those guffaws. I do think it's Christ haunted, not nearly in an explicit way like The Irishman, but it's a story that I think it strikes a nerve in our time because of the modern age and the ubiquity of divorce. And it's an interesting movie because it takes the divorce as a given. There's no question that these characters are getting divorced, and their reasons for doing so are so banal and selfish, transparently so stupid. It's not like some horrible thing like a Walter White situation where they're going to break up. It's just like, well, you didn't want me to be a director. Oh, you didn't want to move to. It's so stupid. And the collateral damage of this whole thing is the child, who doesn't speak too much, but speaks volumes just through a look. And I think that through the utter banality and the stupidity of these two people and the reasons that this is falling apart, you see the problems of divorce in the modern world. I wanted to say two things about it. I was determined to hate it. Okay, when I heard all the praise from it, oh great, a divorce story is more like this is so stupid, blah 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 blah. I saw a couple clips online and I thought it was like filled with overacting. And a lot of people hate Adam Driver, a lot of people hate ScarJo, a lot of people love them. I somewhat have a man crush on Adam Driver. I don't know why. Maybe it's because he can grow hair and I really can't. I don't know. But I thought that he was fantastic, and I thought that about halfway through, it kind of took a turn. Once I got over the fact that this divorce is stupid, I was able to just see the human suffering. And I think that, there's a somewhat hopeful, there's not a pat resolution, but there's a somewhat hopeful conclusion toward it. And it's certainly not pro-divorce. So well done, struck a nerve. And I think that, there's merit there, although it's not a pleasant experience. And my wife just hated it. So I had to send her away and finish it on my own.
Yeah, I thought it was a compelling depiction of a relationship gone awry, and even how, like, sometimes for human beings, what are just like throwaway sentences can take on this immense gravity beyond what we at first assume. And I'll have to say, from the previews, it did look like overacting, but I would have to laud the performances of Driver and Johansson. That being said, there were a couple moments that kind of ruined it for me. You remember the speech from her lawyer about Our Lady?
Yes.
I don't know. At first I thought it was like an ironic piece of the film, sort of like how Catholic Christian understandings have influenced like how we see the relationship between men and women, husband and wives. But it felt to me at the end of it that the filmmaker thought this was really profound. And for me, it was sort of like, like honestly, an 11th grade budding feminist sounding off. But do you think I'm getting that scene wrong?
I don't necessarily think you're getting the scene wrong. I think there is a strained interpretation you can make that is a little defensible, but yeah, it's a little pat. And the saving grace, though, Bud, is that it's coming out of a divorce lawyer's mouth. So it's like, it's almost self-negating as being profound, in my opinion. And I am a lawyer, I'm not a divorce lawyer. So to me, that's the saving grace. If it had been Johansson herself saying it, it might have ruined the movie for me. But because it was her divorce lawyer, who's clearly making good points, alternating with manipulating her into doing things that she doesn't want to do, that I think you can get past it, in my opinion. But yeah, not a great speech in itself.
Well, I think that no matter what, we can say that the movie has created one of the better memes of the last few years, where Adam Driver punching the hole in the wall. People on the internet have put all sorts of hilarious jokes up against the picture of him punching the hole in the wall. And for at least that, we can say thank you to the Marriage Story for a wonderful meme. I know that's what all movies strive for. If
we can reduce a work of art to a Twitter picture, then that's all we need, really. That's it. You've done your job.
Well, speaking of, I was going to say, I want to make sure that we have enough time, because we have the meeting of one of the greatest memes of all time, Crying Michael Jordan, with the documentary that all of us have been waiting for, because if you love sports and you're sports starved, The Last Dance, which is the documentary that's currently going on ESPN about the final season of the Chicago Bulls getting ready to win their sixth title of their second three-peat. Although really it's a documentary of the 90s and all of everything. Oklahoma even shows up because Dennis Rodman played for Southeastern State. I had to throw that in. So guys, I mean, that to me is going to be the hardest thing to decide in the end is this documentary truly great? Or is it everybody who's 30 to 40 years old who loves sports just needed this so bad that we would have taken anything? I'm leaning towards, I think it's really well done. But I wanted to know what you guys think, because I mean, documentaries can be very dry. Sports ones can be very hackneyed and hit very wooden points. I think that they're even doing brilliant stuff like pairing Michael and Scotty first and then doing, Rodman and Coach Jackson together. What do you guys think about this? Is it just us wishing sports were back on and that it was 1998 again, or are we watching greatness?
I think it's truly great. And I can't tell if it's the filmmaker who's doing an amazing job or just like you're saying, Bo, the material that's involved. But I have to say, Steve, those personalities, Scottie Pippen, Phil Jackson, Tony Kukoc, and Jordan all together just makes for great theater. And I know, Steve, you're someone who's grew up a huge Jordan admirer, but you've also been a healthy, robust fan of LeBron. But to me, this settles the GOAT debate. I mean, that level of natural talent, but combined with Jordan's, I would even go beyond fierce competitiveness. The desire to destroy other players and teams is just amazing to watch unfold.
Yeah, I mean, when you see the Catholic view of all things are directed toward an end, and everyone has their special role to fulfill. I mean, Jordan is the basketball player. It's not just he's the greatest basketball player of all time. He is the basketball player, the platonic form of basketball player. And I actually, I grew up. It hits me right where I live. We're all about the same age. But I grew up hating Jordan because in my house,
same here actually, because my mom and the Lakers. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah,
sorry.
you have this in spades, though. I know this about you. My household, we rooted for the underdog. That's what you did. You found out who was the absolute worst player or the worst team, and yet that's who you rooted for, and that's why you rooted for. As I've grown older and I've come to appreciate not just in the sports sense, but art, I try to appreciate greatness and to see the good in whatever thing it is. And Jordan, I don't regret it, but I mean, it's kind of a shame that I just took a rooting perspective instead of an appreciative perspective back then. And I mean, the man is, it's amazing. And I think that, if I had it to do over again, I think I'd appreciate instead of root against, but you're a limited human, and so it is what it is.
My favorite is the people trying to show the pettiness that sports people can have now. The first one came out and someone was like, look at Jordan taking all those inefficient 2-pointers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that era of basketball to me is much more fun to watch. It's not as beautiful. It's certainly not as statistically intelligent to take, very, very far twos instead of stepping back 2 feet and taking threes. But it's much more, there's much more art to it than now. You just like this utilitarian calculus of either dunk or shoot a three. Back then it was much more trench warfare and beauty in his game.
Well, I think that we're coming up to the end here, but like just to defend like doing a documentary well, it's funny how like this in many ways has been like the last few months have been documentary driven. Obviously, the Tiger King is the one that has like made huge sort of like cultural the roundabout and involves Oklahoma, so people talk to me a lot about it. But there's a way in which some documentaries are just like, well, just show the crazy thing for whatever it is, just let the madness reign. And then there's other ones that are like, bury the lead, hide the premise, and like leave each episode like surprising, right, or to the end. This documentary is a story, and it does another thing that documentaries will do, right, where it sort of like shuffles back and forth in time. But like, I want to give a thumbs up for and celebrate someone who does good choices about when they're talking about 1998 and when they like go back and talk about the past. And it really, so far, I just think it's been masterful, them pulling that off.
I know we're up against the wall, but I have to say I'm a fan of today's NBA basketball, and there's a lot of compelling players. I think like the cosmopolitan drift of American culture has kind of ruined professional sports in some way, because I'm like, man, I don't think it's just a nostalgia thing. 90s basketball was superior, and I was trying to put my finger on it. I think it's the greatness of some of the players, but also I don't know if we have that same sense like these guys are the Chicago players and that's Detroit or Boston, and like they absolutely hate each other to the point that Jordan would be bitter enough to leave Isaiah Thomas off of the dream team because Thomas didn't shake his hand after finally seating the throne.
The haterade is sweet in the 90s. Oh, all right, on that one, Steve, we do have to let you go. Steve, please tell the good people where they can go find your work as the Catholic movie guy so that they can hear more in-depth takes on the movies as they come up.
Website is CatholicMovieGuy.com, Facebook, Twitter, Catholic Movie Guy, and Catholic Movie Guy Podcast on Apple, Stitcher, whatever you want to look for it. I'll be there, and I'll do at least one podcast every quarter. So there you go.
Well, Steve, it's great to have you on the show. In fact, I invite anyone to go back and look in our archives to hear you. It's always great to have you on the show. You're one of our favorite guests. Keep safe. Happy Eastertide, and we'll talk to you later, buddy.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
This is The Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts and our families, our city, our state, our nation, the world, the solar system, the whole galaxy, the entire kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.